Oh yay! Oh yay! Oh yay!
As Richard said, we've already had Murray at sea and Murray at home, and I will be touching, no doubt, on some of those things as well, because although I don't want to repeat everything, it's all fits together, of course. So I'm going to concentrate not only on Murray himself in the city, but some of his colleagues, some of the people he may have known and may not, we don't know. But I'll do what I can anyway. I was going to say good morning or good afternoon, I don't know which it is at 12:30, so it's good day to you all.
6 bells.
Right, we have Murray in the city. So just to start off a little bit and set the scene, just to say that Murray's grandfather, also George, came to Chichester from Scotland, and he settled, we think, in the Pallants. We're not sure exactly where, but we think it was the Pallants because that is where his son Gideon was baptised in All Saints Church, which is a bit dark, I apologise for this. He was baptised in All Saints Church in the West Pallant. Gideon himself, he was also served as mayor, as did grandfather. It's a family business. The Murrays owned a couple of houses in the Pallants, and later on they sold one of them and kept the smaller one, which they rented out. Now Gideon had 3 surviving sons. He had John, and then George, the middle child, and Richard. And all of those were to become mayors of Chichester, as was Gideon himself, and his brother and his father. At the time of George's birth, in, we think, about January 1759, they may have resided in the West Street area, because all 3 sons were baptised in the Church of St. Peter the Great, the subdeanery. And at the time, this church was still inside the cathedral. Because in the cathedral in the north transept, many of you will probably have seen this plaque, which shows where the font of the subdeanery church was. And this would have been probably where the 3 boys were baptised. There'd been on a church there already when the cathedral was built. But because the cathedral was built there, the congregation of the subdeanery church still worshipped in their original area, their original church, in what is now the north transept and the chapel of the 4 Virgins. Later on, this is the chapel of the 4 Virgins, for those who don't know the cathedral, and I'm sure you all do, is now where all the church silver is on display. In Victorian times, a new St. Peter the Great church was built just across the road, which is now West Spa. It turned into, at one time when it was first stopped being a church, it turned into an antiques, for selling antiques and stores of antiques. And then it became a pub with much consternation amongst the local people because it was called the Slurping Toad. There were a lot of problems there. People didn't like the idea of a church being the Slurping Toad. But now it's West Bar, and if you go inside there, you can still see a lot of the church that was there. Now, following the amalgamation with St. Peter's and St. Paul's Church, when the St. Peter's was being turned into a bar, it amalgamated with St. Paul's, and so the congregation moved across to St. Paul's up in St. Paul's Road. And the font that was originally in the cathedral and was now in St. Peter's Church was moved to the Victorian St. Paul's Church. And it's there. Now, a couple of years ago, I was in St. Paul's Church with our archaeologist, James Kenny, and he said to me, "What's a Saxon font doing in a Victorian church?" And I didn't know. But Alan Green, was very pleased to enlighten me. Because he's one of the choir, I believe, aren't you, Alan, in that church? So I believe it's possible, or even probable, that this is the very Saxon font where the future Admiral Sir George Murray was baptised. Would you agree?
Oh, indeed.
Yes. He couldn't say no, could he? But he now sings in the choir there, and he probably looks at that font every Sunday. And I was looking at it the other night when I went to a concert there. So now we have the Dolphin and Anchor Hotel. The Dolphin Hotel, they were both coffee houses. There was a Whig coffee house and a Tory coffee house. And the Dolphin was the Tory coffee house, and it was also used for auctions. And in 1814, it's known that Murray auctioned off 2 parcels of land outside the North Gate, but he still retained the stables and horses in a field there. So he obviously was quite well off even then. Now, Anne Teasdale had been born 2 years after George, and she'd been baptised at St Peter the Less Church in North Street. And those of you who are Chichester people, and I think most of you are, St Peter's is now a thoroughfare that goes through opposite C&H Furnishings and along by Lakeland. But there was a church there, St Peter the Less. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that. I should have asked Alan, shouldn't I? But I do have a picture of the old house which was next to it, St Peter's house. And I can remember that, and I'm sure the Chichester boys and girls who grew up here can remember that. So Anne Murray and the Admiral married in St John's Church, Westminster, on the 15th of September, 1795. Now, I always remember this day because it's actually my birthday, but I was born a little later. So in 1803, they had a couple. The couple had one child, a son, and because of George's naval connections, the son was named George St Vincent Thomas Nelson Murray. So it was quite a big, I hope he didn't have to fill in too many forms, because I don't think I know this much. Now, in 1804, younger brother Richard, who was a mercer and a draper, to start with at least, he purchased an old banqueting house in North Street. And this was purported to have belonged at one time to the 17th century William Corley, Member of Parliament for Chichester and the Regicide. This is a photo, a painting, which stands up in the council chamber here in this building, which I believe was painted when he was about 18 years old, before he became Member of Parliament. He was a brewer, and he built the workhouse and the chapel, St Bartholomew's Chapel, in Broyle Road, for 12 decayed tradesmen of Chichester. So Richard bought the banqueting house, and he sold it to a developer. And the developer demolished it, and he built a new house, sold it back to Richard for £3,217, which was a lot of money in 1807. And the house was recently known, as we all know, as Fernley in North Street. And it's now a branch of Will's, the university clothing shop for teenagers, very popular too, I believe. But as you see, rather like Sir George's house across the road, Richard's house was slightly out of the Georgian proportions because of the size of the building plot. The symmetry isn't quite right, as they should actually be balanced. The doorway should be in the middle, and in this case probably 2 windows each side of the doorway, just like the Ship Hotel, George's house. Just 3 years after this, in the City Council's minute book, there is a minute dated in March 1810 that, and I'm quoting, Alderman Richard Murray has offered for sale to the City Council a sofa and 8 elbow chairs for the price he paid in London for them. 6 guineas for the sofa and 18 and 4pence each for the chairs. While this furniture is still used by the mayor in his or her parlour today, and it is used, it's sat on, it's properly used as it was intended, it's entirely probable that it was also used by George Murray when he was mayor in 1815. Murray's friends included John Marsh, the prolific and talented composer who lived at 7 and 8 North Pallant. And here we see the blue house. Part of his house is the blue one here. The other part is now taken up by the new wing of Pallant House Gallery. It was a huge house. And it was owned, as I say, by John Marsh, our local composer. And there is actually a plaque on it, which the City Council put up a few years ago to show that this was somebody very important. We actually know a great deal about John Marsh, because apart from his skills as a musician and a player of organs, he was a great diarist. His diaries have been published, and they are considerable, and they have been available for purchase. I don't know whether they're still available, but they're quite pricey. And as I say, a few years ago, the City Council put up this plaque. There are no known pictures of Marsh, as far as I can find out, and only one picture of his great musical organ, which he played in the assembly room upstairs in this very building. And as far as I know, that's the only picture we have of the organ. The house had previously been owned by William Hayley, the poet, another Chichester person, who was a friend of Murray. Marsh was a friend of Murray, Hayley was a friend of Murray. And although there are no records to show that they did know each other, he may have known people such as William Blake, the mystic poet, George Romney, the painter, and John Flaxman, the sculptor. And he designed a lot of the plaques for the Wedgwood pottery. And he also did many memorials in Chichester Cathedral. This is William Hayley. And this is one of the sculptures in the cathedral. It's quite a nice picture I came across here. Hayley, painted by George Romney. And the picture also shows Romney himself with his paintbrushes. And he also painted this rather stunning picture of Emma Hamilton. We don't know whether they knew each other, but certainly Murray knew Marsh and he knew Hayley, and Hayley knew the others, so maybe they met up from time to time. We don't know. But John Marsh himself recorded that on the 12th of July, 1806, he walked home with the Murrays from the assembly room here to his newly built townhouse in North Street, known now as the Ship Hotel. Marsh also ran a book club in 1794, and this was limited to 40 members, just 40 members. And eventually George and his wife Anne were elected members of this book club. And after the election, they all dined at the Admiral's house, known by this time as the Admiralty. And later on, about a year later, a full meeting of the book club was held at the house. Now, Brother Richard changed from being a mercer and a draper to being a banker. Probably more money in that, I don't know. And he put his money into the old Chichester Bank in East Street, now Lloyd's Bank. Now, East Street had originally been the street of the moneylenders. What's changed, I wonder? It's where the banks were. And there were later, in Murray's time, 3 banks in East Street. It might be assumed that George Murray may well have put his money into the same bank in which Brother Richard was interested. Richard Murray also invested in the new development on the Blackfriars site, which was to become the new town. We all know Newtown nowadays. At this time, many of the churches in Chichester were almost bursting at the seams, and there was need for another church. Newtown was seen as a very good place to build a chapel, and a proprietary chapel. Here we have the chapel. A proprietary chapel is a chapel that was paid for and run by the investors, and they also paid the minister. People who contributed £100 or more became trustees, and John Marsh, George Murray and Richard Murray each contributed £200, so obviously became trustees. And the architect of this chapel, which is now a Grade 1 listed building, was James Elms. Not a very good picture, I'm sorry. And this was opened in 1813. If you're not, I know there are several members who are friends of St John's Chapel here, but if you're not, and if you haven't been in, do go and have a look. It's opened up by volunteers every day between 10 and 4. And you might feel on entering the atmosphere that you feel as you go in, that it could be a non-conformist chapel. It's not. It is Church of England. But it's also very unusual in the whole country, really, as being one of the few chapels in England with a 3-decker pulpit. There are, I think, only about half a dozen as far as I know. I could be wrong. But Admiral Murray and the Lord Bishop of the time contributed to concerts held by John Marsh to celebrate the opening of the chapel in 1813, but these weren't very popular, unfortunately. Murray was keen also on educating the poor, and James Elms, the same architect as the chapel, designed and built a school for poor boys, the Sussex Central School for Boys, which was opened in 1812. You see this? George and Richard Murray each contributed £5, and John contributed £1. And as you can see, if you can read on there, if it was a smaller one that you could see up closer picture, you would be able to see that it educated poor boys to the standards of the Reverend Dr. Bell and the Church of England. This particular school was demolished in the 1880s. Just note that floods aren't new. They're not new. This is in New Park Road, and in the 1880s this was demolished and replaced by the school, which has now become the New Park Centre. Right, well, being Mayor of Chichester seems to have become a family profession. As you can see here, I've marked with red stars the Murrays, who were mayors of Chichester during this time. George's grandfather, George, was mayor in 1727. His father, Gideon, in 1756. Uncle John in 1757. And then the next generation took over, Brother John in 1788 and in 1800. Younger brother Richard, 1794 and 1808. Culminating in George's mayoralty in 1815, and that's why we're celebrating him in Chichester this year. It's quite interesting to note that in 1789, when the outgoing mayor was John Murray, the older brother, the incoming mayor, James Harvey, you can probably see them there. There we are, James Harvey, John Murray, James Harvey, is known to have spent the evening before the ceremony in John's home, presumably picking up a few tips on the job. At this time, the mayor-making ceremonies were held in what is now the Guildhall in Priory Park. There is Sir George Murray's name on the board in the council chamber upstairs in this building. And the mayor-making ceremonies were held there in the Guildhall in Priory Park. All three brothers were members of the Paving Commission, although it has to be said that George didn't attend many meetings, if any. He did, however, need to turn to them to alter the paving outside his new house. But in 1815, it was his turn to be Mayor of Chichester. An election was held, and his opponent was Thomas Rhodes, who'd already been mayor in 1806 and would again be mayor in 1817. The system used was that council members were given small balls of red and white, and a bag was handed around, and you put in the colour of the ball of who you wanted to be mayor. Rhodes was red, Murray was white, and when the bag was emptied, all the balls were white, thus making George Murray the candidate for mayor for the coming year. And during his mayoralty, he was also made a Knight Commander of the Honourable Order of the Bath. And in pictures you will see this round his neck. On the 27th of February, George Murray, 1819, George Murray went to his bed feeling well, but during the night he died of a heart attack, aged just around 60 years old. And on the 8th of March, 1819, he was buried in Paradise in Chichester Cathedral, where his wife Anne joined him some many years later. And a tablet was put up in St Michael's Chapel in the cathedral, the Sailors' Chapel, and I think you've seen this on some of our other talks. After his death, the Naval Chronicle stated, "Admiral Murray's disposition was so gentle and his manners so mild that few men are equally well beloved in the Navy, while few possess the facility of commanding with such ease and at the same time with such energy and effect." His friend William Haley wrote a poem to George Murray after his death. "Hail to thy scene of consecrated rest, thy toil was honour, be thy memory blessed. Lamented Murray, dear distinguished name, the loved co-partner in thy Nelson's fame. With mutual ardour your bright course begun, friendship endeared the praise your valour won. Sussex 'twas thine to show where Murray died, maternal sorrow and maternal pride. Benign and brave, he graced his native earth with Christian virtues and heroic worth. Love hails him now in life's celestial calm, graced by the Lord of hosts with glory's palm."